Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I'm your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 68, brought to you by the one and only legendary Black Belt Magazine. And today, like I say every week, I am very excited for this episode. That should be my slogan at this point, is how excited I am for every episode. But trust me, I'm telling the truth again this week, because we have Andrew Cabilan, a Canadian sport karate legend, a sport karate legend in general, on the show. He has been around the sport over the course of several decades and been an active competitor. And as you can see from his background, a very successful active competitor for all of those decades. All kinds of great stories to share, competing against some of the best, being one of the best at times himself. And we're going to dive into all of that. So Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Maybe give yourself a little bit more of an introduction than that. Maybe cite, the team that you represent. I know you're still currently competing for Top 10 USA, if I'm not mistaken. And then just kind of dive into that. And for our Black Belt audience, what started this whole journey for you?
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Again, the pleasure is all mine here. First of all, my name is Andrew Cabilan. I am from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Geographically speaking, people don't know where it is. It's about 45 minutes away from Toronto and 45 minutes away from Niagara Falls. So we're dead center in the middle. So that's where it is. Basically, outside of karate, I am a full-time mathematics teacher, again, in my city of Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And I'm currently doing that. And I'm actually on my final day of my final block for this year here. I started karate back in 1988, under style of the Goju-Ryu there. And that was actually the first year I started competing. And the first tournament I went to, believe it or not, was a head-to-head battle called the Canusa Games, which is a small Olympic style. It's for all sports, and it's an Olympic style event where our city of Hamilton would compete against the city of Flint, Michigan. And then we, when we would go there, we would be housed, and if they came here, we would house the competitors in our place as well. So it was something that I got started out with, and that was actually the one thing. It was an open format tournament, so my eyes were open to the different styles that were out there, and I was from that point I was introduced to the open sport karate circuit, and it's been a journey since then. So yeah, that was my start, and then for NASCA, my first NASCA tournament was actually the 1991 Diamond Nationals, which I like to talk about on various forums there. So I saw a lot there, and then from there it was just a journey that I'm currently doing. So that was it. Yeah.
I always love hearing the origin stories of like how sport karate competitors found sport karate.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not something that you walk into every martial arts school and they're like, oh yeah, the US Open or the Diamonds. Like, you got to kind of find yourself in the right place to hear about it and then get into it. So you mentioned training at a traditional Goju-Ryu school it was, right? So tell us a bit about how that jump happened. Was your original instructor supportive of competition? Did you kind of have to find it and do it on your own? I know obviously that head-to-head tournament you mentioned was kind of the inspiration to get into it, but take us through the details of that. Was your instructor supportive, and how did that go?
Well, the first school that I went to, we had our inter-school tournament, so I did a little bit of that as well. But again, I only saw people that I would see on a regular basis anyways. And then I actually, from Goju-Ryu, a family friend of ours, I actually referred to him as my uncle, and that's who I currently acknowledge as my instructor. He was into the open stuff. So I actually started training between the two styles, and then eventually focused on to my second style, which is Shorin-Ryu, which is my current black belt. And then from there, he was very supportive of what I did. Now, at that time, I was balancing between what I was learning traditionally inside the dojo, but at that time I was very young, so I really liked the open stuff. So I started my competition by starting doing traditional forms, but then modifying them, and then eventually doing open and creative forms. So that was my start there. The traditional stuff, the focus of it is actually fairly recent in terms of my entire if you look at the broad spectrum of my career. So yeah, I actually started as an open competitor. I think a lot of the people that were around in the early 90s do know that very well. But for the new competitors, that's something that they probably didn't know.
Right. And me, relatively in that timeline, a new competitor, I started competing in 2006. And so I've always known you predominantly as a traditional competitor. I'd seen you do creative before. I think even maybe a few divisions that you had against Kevin Thompson, you guys were both doing creative form. So I'd love to hear some stories about that, right?
Yeah.
But do tell a little bit more. Let's just go back, say that 1991 Diamonds, right?
Yeah.
So that first experience at a major NASCA event, tell us what that was like and how competition there went, I assume, in the open divisions, right?
Yeah, I was a brown belt during that time. And like I said, it was my first NASCA tournament. It was my first taste of big competition with over 1,000 competitors. And to be honest with you, it's a very humbling experience because I came out with a 4th place in weapons. And at that time, it was 17 and under brown belt. And that was big. Like we had like 40 people. And that was with people like Casey Marks. She was a brown belt during that time, right? So I had people like that in my division as a brown belt in my first year in my first NASCA tournament. So I got 4th in weapons, and I didn't even place in forms. But like I said, at that evening show, which was my first evening show on the NASCA circuit, it opened up my eyes in terms of what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. So that was in October, mid-October. So a couple weeks later, Mike Bernardo had his Ontario Grand Nationals, which was a NASCA sanctioned event at the time as a regional. However, it was the same magnitude as a NASCA world level event. So I got there and I attended 2 seminars. First of all was the Mike Bernardo bow seminar, which I picked up a lot. Okay, and second one was Charlie Lee, and that's where Charlie Lee, where he had the saying, flash is trash without good basics. Right. And from there, that opened up my eyes in terms of, what I need to do, what I should do in the future, and how I was going to go about doing it. So, I went to a lot of seminars in my early years just to pick up things here and there, whether it was somebody like Charlie. Larry Lamb was actually another person that I did seminars with, and someone else from JPM too, Gabriel Naga. Gabriel Naga was actually my not my sole inspiration, but one of my inspirations to actually start doing traditional, right? And as I was growing up, there was Gabriel Naga, but then I was also mesmerized by the intensity of Kevin Thompson. So when it came to developing myself as a competitor back in the early 90s, I was dabbling obviously with the open stuff and the traditional stuff. What I put together was basically a combination of the two. So I had, the presentation of Gabriel Naga, but then the intensity of, Master Kevin Thompson, right? So that's what I tried to emulate as I was progressing through the ranks. So yeah, that's basically what I had. That was my the beginning of my journey, basically.
I love that. And what better inspirations than some of the people who would be on a Mount Rushmore of sport karate, right?
Absolutely.
We talk about Mike Bernardo, Kevin Thompson, Casey, Gabriel Naga in traditional forms. Absolutely. And we're going to talk a little bit about that performance style of traditional forms that was so prevalent in the mid to late 90s and the early 2000s. We'll get there. But before we get there, we're talking about the early 90s with you being a brown belt, taking these seminars, trying to figure out this whole sport karate thing. Now let's go ahead and move on to what I consider like one of, if not the like golden eras of sport karate, which is that mid 90s. You had Carmichael's one year in the adult division. You had Mike Chatt and John Valera, and you were there for all of this, competing against these guys in divisions and on stage and everything in between, right?
Yeah.
So tell a little bit about that time period and what it was like to line up with some of those guys, and maybe a couple of your favorite stories from that era as you kind of grew to know what you were doing in sport karate a little bit more.
Oh, absolutely. So 1992 was my brown belt year, and in 1993 that was actually my first year as a black belt, and then halfway through the year I actually switched into adults. Okay, so yeah, that was it was a pretty turbulent year for me in terms of what I need to do. And basically what had happened when I entered that, it was a stage of transition, because in 1993 that was basically the peak of the Mike Bernardo generation, the David McCumber generation, that group of people. But at the same time, myself, Mike Chatt, and John Valera were coming in, and then Carmichael would come in 2 years after that. So there was a lot of transition as I was entering the black belt divisions between 1993 and 1995. So at that time, not only did I transition from a brown belt to a black belt, but I had to transition from a junior to an adult in 1 year. And, that was a lot because, again, I'm physically smaller than everybody else. So I had to compensate for my size with something else, whether it was speed or, focusing on more power. So, I was competing, I was at 17, 18 years old competing with people that are, they were at the late 20s at that time. So it was just about finding myself in terms of how I was going to perform and how I was going to get myself into the top four, at least, right? Or at least in the top 8. I think top 8 was my initial goal. Now, you have to factor in during that time, there weren't as many divisions as there are now. So, for example, in weapons, okay, there was only a hard style and a soft style. There was no designation between musical, creative, and extreme. So at any given tournament, we had at least 25 competitors, and that was just in the hardstyle division. In fact, in the 1994 Battle of Atlanta, which was held at the Dome, we had, I think, 50 or 60 competitors in the hardstyle. To place 5th place in that was quite a big accomplishment. And again, going through my years, again, there was a lot of trial and error. I was, placing 4th and 5th, especially my early years as a black belt. And I think my first big break came at the Mile High Karate Classic, where I actually won what was called the American division at the time, which is in essence creative and in the contemporary form. And yeah, from there it was I was basically placing the top 2 or 3 in the adult American divisions. So yeah, that was my journey in a nutshell in the 90s. And like I said, during that time, not only was it difficult competition wise, but it was ability to separate yourself from the rest of the competitors. Because a lot of the things that I see now is basically, it's not a bad thing, but it's to me, in my eyes, during my time, I saw a lot of innovation. I saw a lot of creativity. What I'm seeing right now, a lot of people, they're doing different forms, but they're looking the same. Take my group, for example, with Chat, Valera, and Simon. Those are 3 different people, okay? But those, they have 3 completely different styles, So, I wanted, I couldn't kick like Mike Chat, I was never a tricker, so I couldn't do the stuff that Carmichael could do. And John Valera, he was just that clean that it was very hard to get into that. So I had to find something that I could do that was that could separate myself from that. So during that time, like I said, I was just, it was my intensity that I want to bring out to the forefront to put me into that group of people, right? So that's why when I started competing, I was focusing on my intensity, but at the same time, when I was looking at technique, what can I do to separate myself from those people? So that's during my time, I was known for the guy who did 10 jumping spinning crescents in my form, right? So that's basically what I did to capture the attention of not just the audience but the judges as well. So yeah, that was a lot of trial and error in my early black belt years, because I really didn't know how to separate myself from the rest of the competition. Right. Yeah, so that's the early 90s.
You mentioned that it's not necessarily a bad thing to not have that innovation like it seemed that we used to, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it for you. I think it is a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And I go back and forth on where this happened, right? Because if you go back and you study the film, and you can find anybody watching, you can find these videos on YouTube, and you watch the late 90s and early 2000s,
yeah,
you see a lot of guys with long hair and hakamas doing bow forms that obviously took a page out of Bernardo's book,
right?
But at the same time, they clearly did not become Mike Bernardo, right? Because when you replicate someone, even though that's imitation is the greatest form of flattery, right? Even though that's great to look up to those legends, you won't ever become a legend yourself just doing the things that they have already done, right? And so when we look at, say, like the kind of mid to late 2000s, early 2010s generation in the 18 to 29 division, you then get an era where in forms and weapons, whichever ones they fell into, Matt for both of them, Matt Emig, and then you get Rudy Raynon and Kalman Choka and Mark Canonizato and Marcel Jones, and they all look very different, much like Chat and Valera and Carmichael and yourself and David Douglas and so on and so forth. All looked very different, right? And then, like, even in my era, the men's weapons division, right? Myself and Reed Presley and Cole Presley, granted, we all do different weapons, but we're not doing the same stuff with the different weapons. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? But you look at the junior division, and then you do see a lot of imitation of the things being done at the top. Whether you look at the junior division now, whether you look at it 10 years ago, whether you look at it 20 years ago,
Yeah.
I feel like you still see that theme of everybody replicating those who are at the top. And it seems that the ones who set themselves apart are the ones that do make whatever that innovation may be, right?
Yeah.
I think several years ago, a great example is Wayne Douglas, right?
Yeah.
Wayne, you could see Casey Marks in Wayne Douglas,
Yeah.
but Wayne also did his own thing. Like the 360 spin on his knees catching the bow
Yeah.
was way ahead of its time, right?
Right.
So I know that I've been going off about that because I think about this all the time, right? As
Right.
Richard Plowden would say, I'm addicted to sport karate. But
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that? Just hearing me say that, like what's your reaction to that?
During my years as a junior, there was a lot of innovation. You had to factor in that my competition as juniors, it was those people that, that started the blueprint of what people are doing today. So, I was competing against guys like Carmichael, against Mike Chad, against John Valera. Not so much Casey Marks, but she was a junior at that time. But she was setting ways. Traditionally, we had Bernadette Ambrosia. She was really strong. So she was different because with her, her being a female, her power was she was just as strong as the guys. During that time, she captured the audience because she was the one female that was beating all the boys, right? So in terms of what I'm seeing in the junior divisions, like as you said, I'm just watching and they're just emulating a lot of the adults that are winning, instead of coming up with their own thing. With my generation, everybody was doing something different. When I was doing 15 to 17 black belt forms, which is just an open division, like everybody, traditional open, were in it. Everybody was different. You could take the two open guys and their two forms would be completely opposite of each other. Same thing with traditionals, that people who did traditional, right? One person would be, doing, a really traditional form, but then you had the quote open traditional forms as well. So we had a mishmash and everybody was just different, and they found a way to creatively do that to separate themselves from each other. And, unfortunately, I'm not seeing that with this younger generation. And even as they move up into adults, it seems that, that creativity, it's just not happening as much as it was when we were coming up, right? So like I said, it's just in terms of what I'm seeing, I'm not seeing anything that is revolutionary. Going back into your interview with Carmichael, that one form that he did set the blueprint, and that blueprint is still there. Now, like I said, I don't know anybody who's actually reconstructed the blueprint. Someone has followed it and just took it a step further, someone like Matt Emig. But like I said, in terms of innovation, there's nothing that's too different from what I grew up with. So that's just an observation. That's why when I'm judging, especially junior CMX forms, it's trying to figure out what is separating one competitor to another. It's very little. So like I said, that's what I'm observing as a judge when I judge junior divisions.
Right. And I think that's excellent advice. So any young competitors watching this, I 100% agree. There needs to be more innovation. It's funny because I can't tell you how many times at tournaments pre-pandemic, I'd be watching a kid do a bow form or whatever, and he'd have some of my moves in it. You know how it goes, right?
Yeah.
And somebody would be next to me and they'd be like, is this one of yours? And I'm like, no, because he's doing all my stuff, right?
Yeah.
A lot of my kids, I tell them, like, you can't do it like me. You can't look like me, because then you'll never get better than me, right?
Yeah.
As an instructor, that's my goal for every student I train, is for them to take this sport to another level. And
Absolutely.
I always tell them, you can't do that if you're just doing the same things that have already been done, right?
Absolutely.
So for all the other junior competitors out there, this is like the heads up. We want to see you innovate more. We want to see new formats. We want to see new moves, new styles. Those are the things that will separate you from the pack. Not just trying to see who can throw their bow up and spin the most times before they catch it, or who can do the most gainer switches in a row before they land on their knee, right? Mm-hmm. But I digress. So we name dropped some of these names that you were competing against back in the day. And so now I want to give our audience an opportunity to be someone lined up with those competitors, right? So from your perspective, who was it that you respected the most? Whether it was their consistency as an athlete, their talent, their sportsmanship around the ring, the way they carried themselves. Who were some of those competitors that you looked up to and you respected the most while you were in the divisions with them?
No, growing up, I actually didn't get to compete with him too much here, but it's someone this should be no surprise. Number one was Mike Bernardo. What he did with the bow just opened up my eyes in terms of what an excellent bow form is. His presentation, the whole thing with the hakama, his style. Okay, again, that was something that when it really captured my my attention when I first got into the sport. And the fact that 30 years down the line, people are still doing the stuff that he's doing, that means he put himself on the map in terms of being innovative during that time there, right? So even when I still do weapons, even my first bow form was just it had the same pattern as his. So for my personal bow, like the blueprint he created is the one that I actually used. So what he did, I totally respect that. He was quiet and humble, and everybody just watched it. So it's just something that I respected about what he did during his time. Like I said, he's the generation before me, and I only got to compete against him once or twice though. So that's one person. Another person, I'm gonna put all three of them in the same category, and you already know who they are. Mike Chat, John Valera, Carmichael Simon, and like I said, that was just the three people that set the standard to the competition that we see today. And they were just my sole motivation in terms of me going out there and being the best that I can be. Okay, so that's within my generation. And when I'm talking about traditional, again, growing up, number one and number one tied is again Gabriel Naga and Kevin Thompson. Like I said, Gabriel Naga, his performance of traditional forms, even though it was creative, it was just like I was just mesmerized by what he did, because he was able to take traditional and make it look exciting and fun, right? So that's why I always look at that and I'm like, that's what I want to do. Same token, you also had Kevin Thompson, who did both traditional and open, but again, it was his intensity that garnered the attention of the audience and the judges. So all those people I looked up to as I was growing up. Fighting wise, and again, another JPM person, Pedro Xavier. Not just because of his last name is my middle name, but he was just watching him. He was just so dynamic when he was fighting. So every time he came out, I would just always watch. And I'm sure like anybody who's followed sport karate, they know him as fighting. But you know what? He did all three. The one of the first 720s that I saw was from Pedro Xavier back in 1994 in a small tournament in Boston. So he did his thing. So that's why I always respected what he did. But like I said, his fighting, it was just amazing when I would watch him fight. So yeah, those are the people that I looked up to. I mean, there's a lot more, but those are the ones that set themselves apart from everybody else, basically, for me. So yeah, that was it.
Very cool. And I actually knew about Pedro Xavier's tricking game from an old story that Coach Rodriguez, for the viewers, Coach Don Rodriguez of Team Paul Mitchell, he always tells this story about how Pedro scored the winning point in a team fight. I don't remember who it was against at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Might have been Trans World Oil. I don't remember for sure. But either way, Pedro scored the winning point and then goes running around the ring, and then Coach holds his hand up for a high five, and Pedro does a jump spinning outside crescent kick to hit Coach's hand, and that's, his celebration of that win. So absolutely, yeah. Pedro Xavier, a legend, not only in point fighting, but he did have that tricking ability as well. Yeah. And yeah, for any viewers that don't recognize some of these names, as soon as this episode's over, go on YouTube and educate yourself. Go check out some of our film study episodes of the podcast in the past, because these are names that come up all the time for the innovations and the impact that they had on sport karate. And so speaking of innovations in sport karate, I want to talk a little bit about the differences as a competitor back then in the 90s and now, because you've been there for both of them, right? You've been an active competitor in the late 2010s, and you've been an active competitor back in the 90s, right? So other than just the division sizes and obviously the divisions being different and the talent being different, not necessarily better or worse, but just different between the eras, right? What would you say were some of the biggest differences that you feel as a competitor from the 20th century compared to the 21st century?
Right now, just for me personally, it's the availability of the number of divisions that we can do, right? So back in the 90s, up until fairly recent, you were only allowed to do one weapons, one forms, and one fighting. So back when, back in my early adult years, which is most of my sport karate career, I was only allowed to do one division. So, I had to choose. So again, as I got older, I wound up choosing traditional forms as my specialty, right? So now you can do the traditional, you can do the open, you can do multiple traditional now if you wanted to. So that's one difference. In terms of the competitors, there's a lot more cross training now than there was during my generation in terms of the different styles. So for example, for right now, you will see people doing traditional, you'll see doing open, you'll see the same people doing soft style. That wasn't too common during my generation. In fact, Carmichael was one of the first to do soft and hard in a single form. So that's another thing. Another thing in terms of just the sport itself is just labeling. When it comes to things like world champion, I think just having all of those different divisions, okay, and this, it's the only negative I'll say, it just kind of diminishes the term, right? So when you're going out there and you're going to a tournament and then, there's 300 black belt divisions, for example, you'll have 300, world champions. I think that's that big difference from what it was when I was competing, because like I said, back when I was competing in the early in the mid 90s, there were only a select few divisions, okay, and especially when it comes to the women's divisions, there weren't as many women's divisions back then as there are now. So for example, you look at women's forms at the present time, they have the same divisions as the men. During the 90s, they only had hard and soft. So something like that, just little things like that, is a lot different. But like I said, a lot of people are just doing a lot more now than there were 20 years ago, simply because of the availability of the divisions. Another thing too is that back during that time, there were only two groupings in terms of the 18 plus and 35 plus. Right now you have 18, 30, 40, 50, and 60. So again, it's all about having all those different divisions. That's broken down in a lot of the associations, and what's happening there is that it's actually taking away some of the competition in other divisions. Back when it was 18 and 35 and you just had that 18 to 34 group, that's a lot of people. Once the division started being segmented the way they are now, that's when the divisions started becoming just a little bit smaller. So that's something that I just saw when it comes to that. Now, what is the same, and this just goes outside the actual tournament itself, is that everybody out there goes out there just to have fun. That has never changed. The social aspect of tournaments, I think, is very important. Being out there to see and meet friends on a regular basis. I think that's one thing that's keeping a lot of people traveling on a certain circuit in order just to see people, right? So, and that's something that's been consistent from 30, 40 years ago. So that's something I'm glad that I'm seeing. In terms of the competitions themselves, they are consistently bigger now than they were before. In the 90s, tournaments were big, but you had the ones that were very big. Your Battle of Atlantis that had 3,000, 4,000 people at any given time. You had your U.S. Opens that were consistently 2,000 people. Okay, so there was always those tournaments, but now you look at a certain tour, you have those numbers, or within 200, 300 people at each event. Okay, so again, overall, the sport is growing in numbers and competition size. And in terms of interest, there's a lot of exposure. I think there's more exposure now than there was back in the late 80s and early 90s. So at least it's out there. People know what it is. And with karate being in the Olympics, traditional, of course, there's a lot more eyes in terms of what we do. So yeah, that's basically the difference between how it was then and how it is now.
I couldn't agree more. And there's two, and I mean, I say I couldn't agree more. I wasn't there, but from what I've studied and what I've heard from other people, I think that's very accurate. And two things that are really interesting that I want to hit on there. Number one, there's way too many world champions. I think you're right about that, right? And, you know, we never want to discredit anyone's titles. And just because we think there's too many world champions does not mean that we think that there are people who don't deserve it necessarily, right? However, within the leagues in which we compete in, many of the leagues, not even just one, but many of the leagues have made it way too easy for competitors to start calling themselves a world champion, right? To the extent that I've even had competitors ask me before, like, Jackson, I won an overall grand. That means I'm a world champion now, right? And I'm like, even that, no, that doesn't mean you're a world champion. Like, you need to win your division over the course of a year. And even then, that gives out a lot of world championships, right? And so, like, for me personally, the other thing that it does is like when people ask me how many world championships I have, and I'm sure it'd be a similar case for you, right, is that the true answer is something ridiculous, like 50, 60, 70. Caitlin Deschelle has like 1 million, right? And so it just doesn't sound right. You know what I mean? People are like, wait, you're like 23. How do you know, like, how do those numbers work out? And so a lot of the times, I just count the biggest ones, right? Like your Warrior Cups, your U.S. Open wins, your Diamonds, right? Like those are the ones that really carry the weight. Obviously, winning a NASCAR overall is a huge deal. Winning a NASCAR or any other world championship is a big deal. But I do agree with what you're saying, that there's probably too many of them available to be won for them to be considered this grand title of world champion, right? Thoughts or responses to that before we move on?
Well, the thing is right now, so let's just take I'm going to start off with North America. So North America right now, NASCAR pretty much has the monopoly. So you can officially crown yourself as a North American champion by winning a NASCAR title. Now, I personally, I don't agree with the world champion status of that. No, North American, absolutely, right? Especially now, because like I said, it's the only league that is around 4 people to become a champion in North America. You know, in the early 2000s, there was a big toss up between NASCAR and NBL, and the two were, you know, head to head up until 2003. Now, to get titles in both circuits, again, was a difficult task during that time, because you had the same quality and quantity of competitors in both circuits. Now, if you won both in the same year, which many people have during the years there, including people from your team there, again, you could crown yourself as an undisputed North American champion, right? So that, I think, like you said, it's just the term itself. Okay, is just I think it's loosely used is the best way to put it. Another thing too, if we're looking at the World Championships, you have a lot to choose from. So you've got WKC, which actually has 2. Right? There's WKC, and there's the old WKC. There's WKU, which is a former WKA, but there's also a WKA, right? So there's a lot to choose from in terms of the different world championships. So the question is, in our sport, which one do you choose, or which one should you go to? Which one is more of a world championship than the other? That you can't answer, right? Because everybody will have a different opinion in terms of which one is the quote real world championships. You know, you got to throw in your WACO in there as well. So like I said, the term itself is being loosely used just all over the place. So when it comes to the world champion, again, that's something that people have to evaluate. You know, where is it coming from? You know, and somebody can throw a tournament in their backyard and call it a world championship, and guess what? People will go in there, compete in it, win, and then say they're a world champion. So like I said, it's just about the term itself is being thrown around and loosely used. So that's just something that people just have to factor in when they go to different tournaments around there.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And from my perspective, it's always been not about what you win, but who you beat, right?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Don't measure yourself against like what the name of this title is or what league you're in or this, that, and the other. Mm-hmm. Find the best, compete against the best. You're going to learn the most that way. And then if you beat the best, then you know, regardless of what the title says, you know that you're of a certain level, right?
Yeah.
And would you agree with this? I think that it's more of an issue for point fighting than it is for forms and weapons as far as the world champion status goes, because I feel like the talent in point fighting is more evenly distributed, at least between North America and Europe, than it is for forms and weapons, right? Because for forms and weapons, for the past really probably 3 decades, we've seen the U.S. and Canada dominate anytime that there's forms at Irish Open, or whether it be
Yeah,
WKC,
absolutely.
WK, WKU. And so the best for a long, long time has been in the United States and Canada. But
Right.
for point fighting, you've got the Hungarians throughout, the 2000s and throughout the 2010s who
Yeah.
have won a number of world championships.
Yeah.
Right now, one of the best fighters on the planet, Elijah Everill, out of the United Kingdom, right?
Yeah.
And the list goes on and on and on. Female fighters from over there as well. Some of the Italians, some of the Germans. Like, there are great fighters over in Roman Brundle from Austria, right?
Yeah.
There is a number of great fighters over in Europe that don't often mesh with the great American fighters.
Absolutely.
Right? Or Avery Plowdens and your Cameron Dawsons and your Bailey Murphys and Jack Feltons and so on and so forth down the list, right? So any responses to that before we move on?
Yeah, I agree with you with that. Like I said, for me, just when it comes to fighting world champions, it seems to be very segmented between what's happening in Europe and what's happening in North America, because a lot of, as you said, a lot of the people in Europe don't come over here. And same token, only a select few go over to Europe, and they only go to the one tournament, the Irish Open, which is actually something that we'll discuss later on. But like I said, when it comes to the fighting, there isn't a single association out there that can truly crown a world champion. Now, if I were to pick one, I would have to say, Irish Open itself for fighting, okay, the best of the best do go there, right? So whoever wins that, to me, in my eyes, okay, you're the best fighter in the planet. But that, again, that's a personal opinion. I don't know. I'm sure some people would actually share that. But when you're looking at the world associations, like I said, going into WKC, WKA, WKU, right? They're all over the place, right? So you're going to have different world champions in fighting and forms from those different leagues there. So like I said, in terms of finding true world champions, again, I think it's segmented for pretty much everything, because there's a group in Europe, especially for traditional, okay, that they don't come over here. A lot of the traditional WKF people, first of all, they not too many of them do come over into an open forum, okay, but then they don't come over here either, because the WKF, it's European, it's predominantly European, okay, but our people, they go there, right? So you have your Ariel Torres as your Mason Stolls, right? They go over there, but those guys, they won't come here because there's nothing for them to compete in for the traditional WKF guys. So again, there's a lot of segmentation, and you can see there, okay, that's two different things there: open sport karate and traditional karate. So yeah.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most interesting divisional innovations of the last, what year did Traditional Challenge come about? Was that around 2011-ish, 2012, somewhere in there?
Traditional Challenge as a division first came into as a rated division 2014. It was originally started by Amerikick prior to me being even involved, which was first time I actually heard of the Traditional Challenge was, I believe, in 2007, 2008, when they had their first NASCA tournament in Atlantic City. And and it became a division in 2014. Yeah, so that's pretty much the history of Traditional Challenge. And I'm pretty sure they did it before then too. But in terms of my knowledge of it, it was 2007 was the first time I actually saw that.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I bring up Traditional Challenge for viewers, Traditional Challenge is a division that still actively exists on the NASCA circuit that essentially takes a page out of the World Karate Federation rulebook, and it's designed for there to be a place for WKF-style traditional forms to be ran, in contrast with the Japanese Okinawan traditional forms division, where competitors could choose to do more open traditional forms, hybrid traditional forms, if they wanted to, which is a topic that we're going to get into shortly. But what we've seen in recent years is, because of the dominance in the adult division of a guy like Ariel Torres and the dominance in the junior division of a guy like Mason Stowell, a lot of now, so junior, they don't have Japanese Okinawan, but they do have regular traditional forms and Traditional Challenge separately. Again, that's just for the viewers. But we see that the WKF style forms are winning both divisions. So there's really not much of a place anymore for that more open. You think Gabriel Naga, you think John Su, you think Will Cornell. There's not really a place for that more open style of traditional form. But I digress, because we're going to dive into that in a moment. Before we get there, I wanted to ask, we've talked about some of these seasons that you've been through Does one stand out? Is there like a favorite tournament season that you had, maybe because of some big milestones in your career, cool moments with other competitors, the social aspect that you've already mentioned? Is there one season that stands out as like, I wish I could live that season over and over
Yeah,
again?
that's an easy one for me. 2011. 2011 was a monumental year for me personally, because it was the year of my transition. Like I said, we're probably going to discuss this a little bit more down the line here. Basically, because going into what you said about quote open traditional forms and the stuff, the WKF stuff, that was the year that I actually came back into competition with that. Right now in 2011, why that's monumental for me personally is the fact that that was the one year that I was able to compete on both the WKC and the WKA teams. So WK was held in Germany, and WKC for 2011 was held in Spain. And in that single year, I won the traditional divisions in both 18 plus and 35 plus in both leagues, WKA and WKC. So like I said, to win that from the two major world associations, like for me, that was a big accomplishment. Especially the fact that in 2011, I was doing the math here. I was 36. So I was in the 18 plus. Everybody's in the early 20s, right? So again, that was a big accomplishment for me. The biggest accomplishment in 2011, and this is something I'm going to put on the record here, is that in all the years that I have competed on NASCA, okay, 2011 was the only year that I won an 18 plus overall. I had won the 18 plus traditional forms grant, and it was after like a three-way tiebreaker between myself, Jarrett Laker, who's my current coach and teammate, and Chris Walker. And the fact that it was those two guys that I competed against with for that title, and it was a three-way tie, okay? And for me to come out as the victor, okay, that was, again, a huge accomplishment for me. But like I said, that was the only time I actually won an 18-plus grand championship on the NASCA circuit throughout the years of competing. And again, I was 36 at that time. So again, all those things that happened in that year was just something that that I would take into consideration. Another year I just want to throw in there, not as to me, it is the number two there. It was 2006, because 2006 was the year that I actually started winning on a consistent basis in the 30 plus division. And I walked out with the overall forms title in NASCA that year, and I also walked out with the 3 forms and weapons titles in my age bracket. So specifically traditional creative open hand forms, and then just the single weapons division at that time. So yeah, 2006 was also a big year for me. So that was number 2. I would say 2011 was my number 1 season, and 2012 was an interesting one, because 2012 is when I decided to go full to do the full NASCA circuit again in 2012. I did the entire circuit, won the overall for that. But the thing for me for that separates it from many of the other years is that I won the 30 plus traditional forms title in NASCA and the 35 plus division in NBL in the same year. Okay, so that basically winning the same division in the same year in the 2 North American leagues in that year there. So yeah, so that's 2012.
Awesome.
Yeah, so those were yeah.
Well, congratulations on those accomplishments. And that's one thing that I always encourage my guest on the show to do is let the viewers know what you've won. Because one thing that I think is a travesty of like modern sport karate fans, particularly the kids, is that they don't know who's won what. Like they don't have any, like, if you're a basketball fan, everybody knows that Jordan has 6 rings and LeBron has 4, right? But like within sport karate, in order for us to continue to make this thing grow, we have to know the history of the sport. And so we have to know when people had their best seasons, what was so-and-so's prime, what was their biggest win. Like these things, they excite me at least, and to any young sport karate fans watching, these are the types of things that should excite you as well if you want to help this sport continue to grow. So Andrew, we talk about some of your favorite seasons. Now let's go into some of your favorite tournaments. And I don't mean like the 1996, this tournament. I mean just in general, tournaments that every year you're excited to come back to, maybe 2 or 3.
Number 1, it's because it's the first NASCA tournament I went to, Diamond Nationals. You know, I never missed that one. And, you know, Mr. Carnahan knows I've been attending that as much as I could since I've started in 1991. In fact, I won the 2013 Ken Eubanks Award just and for the things I did. And so I'm glad that he considered me for that award there. Like I said, that's number one. Number two is AmeriKick, simply because again, it's just I get to see everybody. And again, it's our host tournament there, and I see a lot of good fighters because now they're doing the walkout thing. So I'm seeing a lot of the people from Europe actually coming down for that tournament. So and there's AmeriKick. Another one too is Battle of Atlanta. Okay, Battle of Atlanta, especially when it comes to what the legacy that it's set itself from through the years I'm competing. It's the one tournament I get to see everybody. So when I go to Battle of Atlanta, I always want to go because I feel that if I don't go, I'm going to miss something. So, quite often I go there and, I run into people that are there because they're filming. That's where I last saw all in one place. I saw John Valera and Carmichael Simon and Jeremy Marinas. I don't get to see those guys too often. I believe it's 2014 that they were all there. And you know what? It was just something I just wanted to see. Right. So just going to Battle of Atlanta, like I said, the competition, it's great. But I get to see people that I typically don't see. Especially guys like Nate Andrade, who's from there, and I grew up competing with him. He's a couple years younger than me though, but I get to that's the one time I get to see him. Unfortunately, I can't go this year because of we can't leave the country. But like I said, I always look forward to that. And this one over here might be a little bit biased, but the Toronto International Tournament. Simply because again of what Mike Politi brings to the forefront, especially bringing in tournament back into Toronto after 19 years. It's a pretty big thing here, and it's always something that I know it's in the winter time, but like I said, I always look forward to that because there's always just great competition, great camaraderie, just something I always look forward to, and those are the events I always look forward to that happen on a regular basis. That is, and obviously when I get the chance to the world championships for the various leagues, like WKU or WKC. I always like doing those. But like I said, it all depends on my availability on my my full-time job and whatnot.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great list. I love that you mentioned the Toronto International Tournament of Champions because Mike Politi bringing back an event to Toronto obviously is a big deal. Another thing that I love both about competing there as well as the Quebec Open, Canada's got great sport karate fans. People will come out and people will come watch the tournament just because people love sport karate there, right?
Absolutely.
So that's one thing that I've always loved about competing there is that when you're in Canada competing there, like you feel that there is a rich respect for sport karate history there.
Yeah.
And there's typically a lot of big names around. You know what I mean? It's not surprising to see Mike Bernardo at a tournament up in Canada or Casey or whoever is able to make it, right?
Yeah.
And speaking of Canadians loving sport karate, that might be a rough segue, but that's what I'll use. So being a competitor for so long, one common problem in sport karate is we get a lot of early retirements. In recent years, especially with more and more competitors going Hollywood on us, and by all means they should, taking opportunities to go and do stunts and acting and things of that nature, we see a lot of early retirements in sport karate, right? You're someone that has been around for the last several decades. I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, but I'll let you say it. What has kept you around for so long? Why do you keep coming back?
You know what? It's just getting out there and just competing. I think I just enjoy it because it's fun, right? So it's a way for me to relieve stress after a long week. Again, it's about seeing everybody, but every year I always set some sort of goal for me personally that I would like to chase, and that's why I pursue certain circuits on certain years and things like that. So I think it's just for me, it's just a lot. It's just personal accomplishment in terms of competing on a regular basis. It's nothing really specific, but like I said, I just enjoy performing. I enjoy trying new things, trying new routines. I like performing in front of an audience. So that's probably the one thing that makes me want to come back every year. I'm not a title chaser. It's like, there's years that I just decide, just to compete here and there. But like I said, I've never been, I need this title and that title. It's just about personal accomplishment, right? So a lot of stuff that I do, I do it because of the stuff that I do outside of this, outside of karate. So, the stuff that I do, especially when I do a world championship, my students at my school, they know about it. They'll read about it. They'll hear it about from their friends, right? So it's just showing that I can do something outside of a math classroom, I think is motivating for me to keep on doing it, right? So it's just a lot of the stuff, a lot of the reasons that I am still competing is it's external. So that's predominantly the reason why I'm still doing it. And you know, as long as my body keeps up with the spirit, you know, I'll still be around. Obviously, you know, as I get older, things are going to be a little bit harder. But like I said, the spirit of competition, I don't think will ever disappear. And that's why it's pretty hard for myself and as well as in many Canadians right now, because we can't compete live, right? We can only do virtual right now. So like I said, it's just something I always just want to stay active. And it just keeps myself motivated just to train, and just to also important too, time management, right? So I have to set time aside for me to train in order for me to compete. So that's basically a reason why I still do it. Like I said, I'm not into chasing titles, so I'm just doing it because you know, it's just very, very fun.
That's a great inspirational message, I think, for any of our viewers that might be in their 30s or in their 40s that are like, oh, I got a full-time job. I can't compete anymore. I'd love to, but, you know, I don't got time for that, right? This is someone who is out there doing it right now. You know what I mean? Would physically be at tournaments if it wasn't for the COVID-19 pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So it is something that can be accomplished. And as you can tell from the way that Andrew speaks about it, this is something that he loves, right? And that's what I was going to predict, is that you do it for the love of the game, right?
Yeah.
That's why anybody who's been in sport karate for an extended period of time stays in it, is because we just love what we do. We enjoy being there. We're certainly not in this for the money. A lot of times,
no.
Especially if you're paying your own way to a tournament, you're losing money just by going, right? It's not for fame or titles or anything like that, because there's not much of that to be had.
No.
It's about going because you love sport karate, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So the next thing I want to discuss is, with a long career, one thing that I always respect about competitors who have had long careers like yourself is the evolution from one generation to the next, and being able to change with that. The person who I always talk about with this the most is Casey Marks, because in my opinion, if you look at the way that Casey executed bow strikes in the 90s and in the early 2000s compared to if you watch her videos from when she came back around 2011, 12, somewhere in there, did the Battle of Atlanta, did Quebec Open. If you look at that, you see not only two different competitors, you see two different methods of bow striking that reflects a change that occurred at some point in the 2000s era, right? And the fact that she recognized that and was able to make that switch and be successful in both eras, to me, is incredibly impressive, right? We've been teasing this whole like open traditional to WKF traditional topic this whole episode. So now we're going to get into it, because you were a guy, and I remember watching this, that would come out and do more of the performance style traditional forms. I remember seeing you run Gopai Show numerous times, which, for those of you that are sport karate fans, you know that Gopai Show is a point of contention amongst the traditional forms community. I have an unpopular opinion. I like a well-done Gopai Show. I think Micah Carnes had a beautiful Gopai Show. I loved watching Lawrence Collymore do Gopai Show. Lauren Carney.
Well, I want to bring up, you know, Lawrence Collymore. You know, he's doing his thing in Chicago right now. You know, he's one of my guys, right? He trained with myself and Mike Politi. So for him to do it, you know, I can't say anything bad about it. But yeah, he got it from me. So yeah. You know, I like I said, continue on, but I just want to throw that in there just in case he's watching.
Absolutely. So like me, I'm someone who, like, I enjoy that, but now it's almost like certain forms, if you run them, whether it's Gopai Show or some hybrid traditional form or whatever it is, there are these styles of more performance-based traditional forms that simply don't seem to be able to be as successful as they used to be against the WKF traditional forms. And you're someone who changed with the times. You went from doing the more performance style, and then you've been training, and now you're competing with the more WKF style traditional forms, and it's been very successful for you, right? So let's start within traditional forms by itself first. What do you make of that shift? Would you like to see a place where those open traditional forms can still be successful alongside the WKF? Do you think it's good that that transition has happened? How do you view that whole situation?
Okay, so right now you have the two separate divisions, which is the Japanese Okinawan and the classical, the traditional form style. I call it classical because they actually in WKC that's what they call it. Is the exact same thing. Anyways, um, it is a good change. However, I do think that they do need to tighten up the rules for Japanese Okinawan. So whoever wants to do the hybrid or open type of traditional forms, that's the only thing you can do. Whereas in traditional challenge, that's where you do the WKF stuff. Because what's happening right now is that you're seeing both forms in both divisions, which is kind of redundant, right? So for me, I think they just need to change the rules, and they should at least rename it, because what WKU and WKC have done is that they actually just call it hard style, right? So they can do whatever form they want, as long as it has traditional movements, which is the what Japanese Okinawan is labeled as, right? Because right now, when I see two, the same competitor doing the same form in two different divisions, I start scratching my head. I go, well, what's the difference between the two divisions, right? So for me personally, I do think there's a place for these more performance-based traditional forms, and I think they just need to make that division separate, call it something else, or tighten up the rules. Because the way I look at it, okay, it's all about the semantics of the name. Okay, if you're gonna do a Japanese / Okinawan form, okay, that's what you should do for that. So for me personally, if you do a hybrid form or a made up form and you compete in the Japanese Okinawan division, you're not, okay, that's not what you're doing. Like I said, they should take a division like that, rename it, rebrand it as hard style, and then keep the Japanese Okinawan WKF style in the traditional challenge. Okay, and then just like completely separate those two, right?
Right.
Now that's within the Japanese divisions.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing's happening with Korean, right? So in Korean, you are seeing those hybrid forms at the same time. Token, you're seeing those traditional forms like the ones you see from Jeff Doss, right, in the same division. That shouldn't be happening either, right? So the way I look at it is that you need to take that one division, tighten up the rules, so you have something that is Korean, right? NASCA most recently did something, that is in line with the traditional challenge, that for the Kempo division, for example, they have set criteria for that. Okay, they need to do that for Korean. Okay, so like I said, that's my take on it. And it's again, Japanese Okinawan. It's great that they've segmented or separated the two, but they do need to work on the rules for Korean, because when I see that division, I'm just seeing a mishmash of different stuff. Like I said, the performance-based Korean, and then the people who are doing the traditional Korean. So I think that's just something that needs to be worked on.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. I think you hit the nail on the head with the naming convention, right?
Yeah.
And in my opinion, I think we need to normalize traditional challenge. Like,
yeah.
It's been an official NASCA division for several years now, and it still has this strange name. Like when it was new and shiny and it was like this special new thing, traditional challenge makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But now it's just another division.
It's just another division, absolutely.
We don't call musical weapons the Extreme Weapons Challenge. You know what I'm saying? So why don't we take the traditional challenge rules, throw them in Japanese Okinawan, because that's what it's supposed to be anyway.
That's what I would do it.
Yes.
Like I said, it's something that I've just spoken about. I haven't made anything formal. First of all, the traditional challenge rules is actually something that I drafted. That's why if you look at the rules for the NASCA traditional challenge and the WKC classical kata division, they are word for word the same, because like I said, I did draft the original copy of that, but I digress. But like I said, they do need to just to separate the two divisions, make the traditional challenge just a regular division, because in essence, that's what it is. There's nothing that makes that division different from the Japanese Okinawan division in terms of the criteria. Now, if they did something like, for example, they did 2 rounds or something like that, that's something different. But like I said, it's just another division where they're just doing one form, and they walk out with a divisional first or second place, right? So like I said, I think that's just something that needs to be be worked on, because like I said, I don't mind the performance-based traditional forms, but they just need a separate division for that.
Right, I agree. And so continuing to speak about the importance of evolution throughout a career, and you making that switch from one type of traditional form to the next, at least competitively.
Yeah.
Now speak more generally as to the importance of that, and you as a competitor, how did you make that identification and then make that switch in time to be able to be successful at both?
Well, there's a saying, if you don't evolve, you'll dissolve. So you have to do something that's going to be different and something that's going to set a new standard to how things should be done. So as between 2006 to mid 2010, I was doing those performance-based traditional forms. 2000 at the end of 2010 U.S. Open, it basically, I'll be honest, doing those kind of forms made me sick to my stomach that I actually stopped competing for the rest of the year. Right. So I think for me that was a moment where I actually had to rethink and I decided to repackage myself. And like I said, there was a lot of transition during 2010, just in my life in general. So you know what, I just did a full transition. 2010 was a year. It was a year that I went to Okinawa, and I saw a lot of things, and then I go, you know what, that's one I want to start doing. So I took a long time off. So 2010 U.S. Open was my last event in 2010. Like I said, I just want to step back and just revamp and repackage what I wanted to do. Even though I knew initially I wasn't going to win at first, and that's exactly what was happening. So in 2011 Quebec Open, okay, which is a lot of time between U.S. Open 2010 and at the Quebec Open 2011, because it was in April. Okay, I decided to come back out with my new performances, which is the classical kata. And and that's exactly what's happened. I was losing the first few tournaments. My first win with traditional form was at the 2011 U.S. Open, right? And I think from there, that's when it started. Then the judges started buying into that, because before that nobody was doing it, right? So to bring that to the forefront, to set a new standard, notice that everybody now they are doing those kind of forms, right? Luckily, there were like-minded individuals like Jarrett Liker who were supporting of that, and again, more and more people started doing it. You had your Chris Walkers that started doing that as well. So like I said, it just set us for me to come out and do that and actually to start winning with it. I think it just changed how judges evaluate what traditional forms should look like. And fast forward to current present time here, you look at the Japanese Okinawan division, it is those forms that are winning. You look at the junior traditional divisions, which is a mishmash of everybody. Guess what? It's those forms that are winning. So like I said, if you don't evolve, you're going to dissolve. So it's all about anything you do, even if it's traditional, you have to do something that is different, that's going to just set a new way of looking at things.
I agree. It's another great take-home message. And now, as we start to approach the end of the show here, we've been talking a lot about kind of the state of the way divisions are set up and world championships and where people compete and everything in between. So now I want to speak a little bit about your current division, competing in the 30-plus divisions, what are referred to kind of collectively as the senior divisions. Yep. How do you rate the state of the senior divisions today, just in general?
Okay, well, the senior divisions right now, if you look at the overall picture, as people get older, there's more competitors. So for example, the biggest senior division right now is the 50 plus. At any given time, you will see between 15 to 20 competitors. And we're not talking about filler competitors. Like each of those 15 to 20 in the 50 plus division, they could potentially win, right? My division, up until last year, it was kind of so-so, but now in terms of the 40 plus, we consistently get 9 or 10 people, because a lot of the people that were in their late 30s in the previous years moved up. You have your Eric Tremblay, your Ramon Fernandez, right? You have all those people that moved up into 40 last year. So my division is a lot deeper. Now that leaves to, well, what's happening in 30 plus? See, for me personally, the 30 plus, I kind of call that the senior division purgatory, because right now it's pretty barren. Right. And the reason for that is because all of the late 30s people, they're now 40. So they're competing in 40 plus. And basically what's happening is that anybody who is in their early to mid 30s, they're choosing to compete in 18 plus. A good example of that is Joey Castro. He's in his 30s, he's competing 18 and winning. So, people like him, they're going to stay in 18 because again, that's considered and quote the elite age group. So like I said, in terms of the state of the senior division, they are larger, but they are larger for the older competitors. Now, with that said, I noticed last week it was released that they put in a revised cash award list there, and I noticed that the 50 plus again was not given any kind of cash prize for their grand wins, whereas the fighting was, which kind of boggled my mind, seeing that the biggest divisions in senior are the 50 plus divisions. So for me personally, I think they're just that does need to change, because these guys are putting a lot of heart into what they're doing, and they're not getting any kind of reward for it. That's why when in 2019, I decided to sponsor a 50 plus overall grand championship at the Toronto tournament, because you know what, they need to be recognized for their efforts, right? So that's the one thing that I would like to see change in the senior division, is for them to get a little bit more of a reward for their efforts. Okay, number two, I would like to see them more on stage. A lot. Diamond Nationals, for example, has their 30 plus overall ring, which is great, and I think more tournaments needs to start doing things like that. A lot of these people have been around sport for many, many, many years. In particular, consistently, myself and Terry Kramer have been around. We haven't stopped competing, right? So I think seniors do have a place on stage. I'm just wondering why the rest of the tournaments haven't followed that. So I think that's just something that just needs to be considered in the future. So like I said, that's the state of the senior division. Like I said, they are bigger, but there are certain divisions that are bigger than others. But overall, it's great competition. We have our own grand championship, which is fairly new, or fairly recent. So just to have that is great. Back when I started in the senior division in 2005, we were pretty much stuck in a corner, which is, no one got to see us. And even our grands, it's never set as a priority. So I think that needs to change. So like I said, a lot of changes for the senior divisions, just based on the fact that the participation has increased. So yeah, that's pretty much what my take on the senior division is.
I appreciate that, and I agree. I think that one point that you bring up there is the fact that people need to see these competitors more often. Number one, not only have they put years and years and years of dedication into sport karate, which is while they're still around, but they throw down, right? Like I remember being a young competitor. This was maybe 2006, 2007 Battle of Atlanta. And I was just like stumbling around the tournament trying to find my ring or whatever. Next thing I know, I'm like, oh, that's Kevin Thompson doing a comma form. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it was just like some random ring back in the corner. And it was, the person who many considered to be the best to ever do this across all three disciplines, right? Yeah. And just, in a ring doing his thing. And I'm pretty sure it was senior grands. I don't think it was even just a division. I think that
it was probably senior grands.
Him doing the grands, you know what I'm saying? Which to me, that just like blew my mind even back then, is I'm like, how do we not showcase this more? You know what I mean? So I certainly see where you're coming from there. Now, looking into the future with a more broad scope over all of sport karate, and I'll put the time span on it of 10 years, so that if you wanted it to be short term, that's cool. But if you wanted it to be something that takes a while, that's fine too. What are some of maybe 1, 2, 3 of the biggest changes that you would like to see in sport karate over the next decade?
Well, like I said, the one change I do want to see, and I'm hoping that more tournaments will follow. Again, it's just to put more exposure into seniors, as well as to disperse more money for the seniors, especially the 50 plus division, because like I said, those divisions are getting a lot bigger. Number two, I would like to see a more unified sport. Like I said, there's a lot of world championships out there. I know it's politically, it's going to be a hard task. I'm going to say impossible, but that is something I would like to see. Another thing too, with just the way that the points work in NASCAR, I think just something just needs to be reconstructed so that it's not a cumulative points chase. Because if you take a look at sports that do have that, and let's take, for example, professional tennis, they do have a cumulative points chase, but they also have an end of the year event where they do crown a champion. I think that's something that needs to be considered, especially with the number of competitors right now, because right now the way it's working is that, the more tournaments you go to, the more points you get, type of thing. So I think that just needs that's something that just needs to be reconstructed. So yeah, that's another thing I want to see. But again, going back into the sport itself and like looking at the rules, I just do need to think they in certain divisions that they do need to just revamp some of the rules in some of those divisions. Another thing too, and then something that it's I'm just so shocked that it happens, that the junior divisions don't have a soft division. And that's been something that, in the 30 plus years that I've been on NASCA, they just haven't offered that. I'm just like, I would like to see that, because I know there's junior competitors that would like to do that. So I think that's something that they should throw in there. So I would like to see that. But again, for me, personally, I just want to see a unified sport with a common set of rules. And like I said, when you're doing different circuits and the rules, change dramatically, it's not really good for the sport. So I just want to see, again, just a more unified sport in the end. Another thing too is just in terms of the competitor mindset, right? A lot, and this happens a lot in the younger divisions, is that it's about being able to take a loss, right? For me personally, I just take every failure as a stepping stone to success there. And there's just a lot of the younger competitors just don't see it that way. And unfortunately, the parents are actually feeding into that. The way I look at it and go, competing is a learning experience. You take my personal experience, for example, when I was humbled at 1991 Diamonds, I learned from that. So the way I look at it is that when you go to a tournament, okay, and the results aren't what you want them to be, well, figure it out. See what see what you need to do. Okay, but at the same time, see what you need to also maintain. That's why when people ask, when you are looking at competition and you're thinking of your game plan in terms of, how are you going to win this division, who do you watch? And the way I look at it, right, let's just say I get second place. It's one thing to look at the first place competitor and look and see, well, you know what, this person did this, and that's why this person is better. At the same time, I'm still looking at the third and fourth place guy, because the third and fourth place guy, guess what? Well, I'm going to try not do what they do, but the same token, I also know that they are going to find ways to improve themselves. So I always look at the broad spectrum of my competition to evaluate what I need to do to get to where I want to be. And I think everybody needs to adopt that mindset, because right now, like I said, it's just about instant gratification, and people are a lot of them are the younger competitors, that is, they're just expecting to win all the time, okay, which isn't the case, because there can only be one winner.
Exactly. No, I think that's a problem in the junior divisions right now as well. It's way too often that even sometimes in 14 to 17 divisions, we see a competitor that loses and then comes off the stage either throwing a fit or their head down or crying or whatever. And it's like, you're a teenager. Like, you're going to be in the adult division in a few years. Like, it's time to grow up and like learn how to lose, because exactly like you said, it's a learning experience, right? And one thing that I always stress to my students, and I will continue to shout from rooftops, is you have to respect your competitors even when they beat you. Because if you ever want to be considered somebody that was good or great or a legend, you've got to beat other great competitors. Like, you're not going to get that reputation for beating people who aren't very good. Like, you need competitors to beat you to show how good they are, so that then you can overcome that and show how good you are. It's a symbiotic relationship between competitors.
Absolutely.
Where you're going to have to win and lose and be on both sides of it in the end, for both of you to come out as good or great or legendary competitors, right? So Andrew, I think this has been excellent. Lots of great perspectives, and I really do appreciate your time. I would say I hope to see you soon, but I know that, with the whole Canada situation right now, that may not be possible. So given what both obviously being a Canadian resident, but also being someone who wants to be at sport karate tournaments, can you give the rest of the world a little bit of a status update of what's going on up there?
So right now, when people think of Canada, they don't realize it's a very big place. So not every province in Canada has the same restrictions. Now, a lot, especially in sport karate, people are wondering, well, what's going up here? And in Ontario, where the Toronto tournament is, because people are asking about that, is the fact that our restrictions, our stay-at-home order is going to be lifted on June the 2nd. Now, from there, they're going to be opening up our province in phases, and karate instruction inside won't be able to take place until phase 3, which they don't expect until late July. Okay, so in terms of karate, we're not even allowed to do it. In fact, when it comes to things like performing, as a DJ, like I'm not even allowed to do live streams because they fear that it promotes gathering. So that's something like that. It's just kind of twisted in terms of the restrictions we do have. And even like outdoor training for karate or any type of fitness isn't even going to be allowed until end of June. So there's just a lot of stuff that we cannot do, right? Organized sports, okay, not happening. They actually allowed for camps, just camping outside. That's not till July. So the way I look at, I am hoping that we will be able to open up by the Toronto tournament, at least until the late fall. I'm hoping that we'll have that we will be open. But like I said, just everybody just need to keep their eyes on the news to see if you can come up or not. Because right now we can't come down, and if we do go down there and we come back up, we have to quarantine for 14 days, and a lot of us can't afford that for different reasons, right? So that's the status of Canada up here.
Wow. I mean, that is, I certainly feel for you guys, and I hope that everybody watching sends some positive vibes up to Canada for their situation to improve, not just in terms of trying to get to sport karate tournaments. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a big deal, but just being able to operate businesses and make a living still, and I know that that's obviously difficult given the circumstances that you guys are in. So everybody watching, send positive vibes to Canada that they can get through this quickly and effectively, without introducing any public health risks at the same time. So thank you for that update, because I know that a lot of our American viewers that want to see our Canadian friends come and compete, might be wondering like, what's the deal? So I do appreciate that. And once again, I appreciate your time today. Any closing thoughts or comments before we head out of here?
Just as a competitor, okay, especially for the ones that are just starting or just are in the middle of their competitive career, okay, just be resilient. Just remember that when you compete, okay, whatever results you get, whether you win or lose, okay, learn from it. And I think that's just a mindset that competitors just need to have in general, because that's the only way that you can improve, right? So again, it's just about having a mindset that when you go out there, okay, just take the results you get and just learn from it, right? And you go to these different tournaments, even though each one feels the same, okay, the results will always be different. So you can win one tournament, okay, and then not even place in the other, okay, stuff like that happens. So the way I look at it, just be able to accept losses, okay, but at the same time be graceful when you do win, okay, because there's also such thing as a bad winner. So like I said, just go in there, be humble, okay, but at the same time, take every time you go step up on the mat, okay, take it as a learning experience. And when you take a look at your competition, okay, evaluate everyone to see where you measure up, because you can be first place, okay, but it doesn't take much for you to be knocked off from the top there, right? So always make sure that you're studying your competition, because that's the way that you can see what you need to do and then what you also need to maintain. So again, it's just about having the mindset there. Another thing I just want to just want to get out there is that, again, the sport does need some work here. It's great, don't get me wrong, but a lot of things just needs to be more competitor friendly, right? So like I said, just little things that just need to be worked on the administrative level. But like I said, I would like to see some change there. But overall, the sport's been great. I've been in it for many, many years. So like I said, just enjoy your time out there, because a lot of the friendships and the relationships that you do establish in sport karate, okay, are ones that are gonna last you a lifetime, right? A lot of the people that I competed with back in the early 90s, I still keep in touch with them. So, you know, it's a long-term and lifetime journey.
So much great insight there. And I hope that, if you're tuning into the podcast here close to the tail end, be sure that you go ahead and rewind and watch this whole thing, because all types of great little stories and opinions and perspectives throughout this episode. So once again, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Our viewers, thank you for tuning in. We wouldn't be able to do this without your support. Make sure if you enjoyed this episode, if you want to share and spread and help Sport Karate grow, hit that share button on Facebook so that you can get all your friends to see this episode too. This has been 68 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I'm Jackson Rudolph, and I'll see you next time.
See ya. Thank you.